Thank you so much for the introduction and good afternoon, everyone. It's really a pleasure to welcome you today at this panel, how can we achieve growth and innovation for Europe, a topic that could be more timely or more essential. One of the most compelling insights from Mario Draghi report on the future European competitiveness addresses to the European innovation challenges, say, and I'm quoting, "It is because innovation often lacks synergy and because we are failing to translate ideas into commercial success, innovative companies that want to scale up in Europe are hindered at every stage by the lack of a single market or integrated capital market, stopping the cycle of innovation in its tracks." This statement underscored the critical need for structural reform to foster innovation and economic growth in the European Union and in Europe in general. So as we navigate a fast-changing world marked by technological disruption, demographic shift, and new geopolitical reality, Europe faces both urgent challenge and extraordinary opportunity. Therefore, there are several questions that we all need to ask to ourselves. How do we remain competitive in a global economy increasingly driven by innovation? How do we build a smart regulatory and fiscal environment that fosters entrepreneurship, scale up our small and medium enterprise, and brings cutting-edge research to market? So this panel brings together diverse perspectives from public policy to economic point of view, because the future European prosperity will be shaped not by one sector alone, but how we connect the dots between smart governments, smart regulation, private sector leadership, and cross-border competition. So it's my pleasure today to introduce our panelists. I wanted to start a first round focus on the topic of the title, and the second round will be a Q&A, and there will be a few minutes for Q&A from you guys. So I want to start with Pieter Cleppe regarding the topic of this panel. What is your opinion? What is your insight?
Well, growth in Europe, we haven't seen all that much of it in recent years, and there's of course many causes for that. I mean, I deal with European Union policy. I focus on that, writing articles criticizing it from a free market policy perspective. And I think apart from all the mistakes that are being made at the member state level, there's something to say that at the EU level, a lot of mistakes have been made. And first of all, I should start with what has not happened. So the European Union Treaty foresees that there's a free flow of people, goods, capital, services. And when it comes to goods, the internal market has sort of been freed up, not entirely. But certainly when it comes to services, if you want to buy an insurance in another European member state, if you want to buy a car in another European member state, e-commerce, if you start a small company trying to sell stuff across Europe, I mean, if you do that in the United States, it's much easier than in Europe. So if you're talking about the capital market, if you're looking for capital, if your company has grown a little bit, you see many of these companies moving to New York because there's a lot more capital over there. And part of the reason, not the entire reason, is that we still have lots and lots of national protectionism. Now, should we blame the European Commission for that? Yes and no. No, because it's of course mostly the member states that say no consistently when the European Commission has proposed to do something about it. But yes, they're not even trying anymore. The priority for the EU Commission has been to try to harmonize at the highest level, come up with ever more money for the EU budget and the COVID recovery fund, and they try to use every crisis to achieve those goals. So I think they've been neglecting their core business entirely. Even trade policy, opening up not only trade within Europe, but with the rest of the world. Certainly since the British voted to leave the EU in 2016, the EU has had very little success in concluding trade deals. Thankfully, finally, they had a deal with Mercosur, with the Latin American trade bloc, at the end of last year, but that still has to be approved by the member states. However, there's hope. We now have Donald Trump in the White House, and he's sort of managing to reconvert the European Commission. Actually, in the last month, there's been quite a lot of progress in terms of openness. The European Commission is now talking to Malaysia, to India again, more serious. They're also watering down some of the demands to the trading partners. So one of the reasons why, for example, the Mercosur deal, it took so long, is that the EU came up with a list of all kinds of environmental policies that they would like the Mercosur countries to introduce. And they were like, well, you know, I thought we were negotiating a trade deal. I was not under the, we were not supposed to receive a list with policies. So also there the European Commission is watering down its rigid stance. So there's some hope for the future. Of course, apart from sort of neglect, the EU has gone very far in trying to regulate everything from energy to even industries that barely exist in Europe, AI. And I remember in December 2023, the French president of all people, Emmanuel Macron, he said, well, it's not so intelligent to regulate an industry when you don't have much of it. He was referring to the EU's AI Act that was then only proposed, has just entered into force, and is constraining AI innovation quite a bit. So you would then think if the president of France protest this, the machine would stop, but it did not stop. They simply passed it. So I think that's quite telling.
Thank you, Peter. And how can we achieve innovation and growth in Europe?
Well, I think it makes sense for me to sort of cover the perspective of young people for this. And I think the main thing that we're seeing right now is a lot of uncertainty in terms of how the economy is looking, in terms of prospects for innovation. And from that, obviously, comes a lot of disillusionment for young people, because there doesn't seem to be a lot of an appetite for dynamism in the EU right now to innovate and to try and find solutions through innovation. Whenever we're faced with some sort of economic problem, the trend is like another regulation to figure it out, and not so much how can we foster an environment where young people are actually encouraged to solve these things through innovation, through creativity. And that brings a lot of uncertainty, that brings a lot of disillusionment. And what I also think, unfortunately, it creates is a lot of polarization, because young people are very uncertain when we look at our economic future and economic stability, prospects for jobs. And that, of course, is identified by almost every young person, I think, in the EU right now, but also our perspectives on how to solve these problems are vastly different. And you see young people sort of shifting to the opposite ends of the political spectrum because of it. So it doesn't really feel like there can be a concerted effort from young people. How can we fix this? How can we address this together? And on top of that, I also think it's a bit of a cultural problem right now in the EU with innovation, with a mindset of we want dynamism, we want people who bring innovation, we want to encourage young people, because I think in the environments that we young people are in, for example, universities, academic environments, there really is more of a kind of like participation award mentality, not so much like we are going to encourage whoever stands out, we're going to encourage whoever actually wants to bring solutions, who wants to innovate. And much rather it's like, oh, if you're not comfortable doing this, you don't have to. And I think, so there's just a necessity of actually motivating young people to want to contribute to innovation through, well, making it less bureaucratic, thinking of how can we resolve all of these red tape issues that are really massive barriers to even just motivation to want to try something, and then the cultural aspect of addressing the polarization that comes from all of this uncertainty, and also trying to really come back into this mindset of innovation is the way to go and not like complacency, comfort.
Thank you, Anne. So considering the overregulation, we have a country that decided years ago to leave European Union. So Fred, what is your thought on that?
Thank you very much, Lorenzo. I will talk mainly about Britain, but I think the overall picture affecting Britain is very, very similar to that affecting the European Union. You may saw the news this week that the IMF has downgraded growth forecasts around the world again, Everyone's terrible, basically. I think the US just avoids a recession because the US, despite its recent errors, is the strongest economy in the world, but Britain and then the big economies in Europe are doing very, very badly. It's quite tragic to see this because I think so much of it's self-imposed, and it has basically shows the picture that Western Europe hasn't really recovered since the financial crisis. We've sort of partly put ourselves back together, but we've indulged in an economic model which is so self-defeating. The European Union is regulating its economy to death. It's a great thing that Britain has a lifeline, has an exit route by voting to leave the European Union, but so far our political class hasn't managed to do it. Maybe we will in the future. Without taking too much time, I think some of the worst policies at the moment are probably in the world of energy policy, digital regulation. We touched on digital regulation already, but energy policy like the ETS policy that the European Union has and that Britain is still insisting on copying is just destroying heavy industry in Europe and in Britain. 20 years ago, the UK had one of the best chemicals industries in the world. We had low cost of gas, low cost of oil, a very, very open and lightly regulated market. We had a decent quality labor market, and actually quite a good tax system for building business. Now, since the introduction of ETS rules, net zero rules, steady increase in tax and labor market regulation, all of these competitive advantages we have had have blown away. And this has really been exposed, I think, after the energy price spike from the Ukraine war and the end of the zero interest rates era. I think the zero interest rates era allowed Britain and Europe to sort of paper over the cracks and think everything was fine because, you know, house prices steadily increased in value, so middle class people felt like they were getting better off, they were increasing in their wealth, but everything just fell apart from 2022. I think that provides an opportunity, though, because there's no room for complacency. The Britain being outside the European Union is quite helpful because no longer can a British MP just blame the European Commission. Now British MPs are responsible for the state of Britain. That is something I'm very, very grateful for, and I think that whether you're German or Belgian or from any other country around this room who's in the EU, it's something you lack is the democratic accountability. So maybe we have a route out. I really, really hope Britain secures a trade deal with the United States. That does seem like the most likely trade deal that the US will sign this year. But the most important prize from that would be a way of re-engineering a properly deregulatory approach to government in the Western world. It would mean that Britain can finally break away from the European Union's process, regulatory, precautionary principle, risk-averse approach to something much more dynamic and much more pro-innovation. And before I wrap off, I do also think it's worth mentioning the disastrous immigration policies that Britain and Europe have had in the last decade too, because it has not enabled greater innovation and experimentation. We're seeing this situation now where it looks like contributors from Britain will be leaving to the UAE, to USA, to Australia, and the people we will be bringing into the country will be burdens to the state, not contributors to the state. I think that's probably true in Europe as well, and that's a great worry for the next few years.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you so much. Last but not least, my colleague Andrea.
Well, thank you for the question. I just would like to answer the question, and my answer would be, don't do anything. Stop whatever you're doing and just don't do anything because it can't get much worse. And I'll just give a couple of examples where I feel like that statement is true. The European Union and its member state Germany, for example, had the leading industry in automotive manufacturing, parts, engineering, that kind of thing. And because of European Union regulation, that industry now is crippling. And whenever politicians decide that a technology is the chosen one, like electric cars in this case, and there's no room for innovation anymore because like politicians are choosing the way forward, companies can't thrive. And usually all of you make decisions for your personal lives. You decide what phone you want to buy, you decide what car you want to buy, you decide at what restaurant you want to eat. And so the moment a politician steps into this and decides something that is very personal to your lives, it will affect your choices. And that system just doesn't work. And if we look now, we didn't have growth in many European member states since COVID. There's no hope really to see that in this year or next year there's growth coming back to any of the member states, especially not to Germany that is financing most of it. And if we now enter the new era of the Trump presidency, where we see the next 4 years, the US is doing the exact opposite on all policy issues than Europe. So you have mass migration in Europe, you have deportations in the United States. You have higher energy costs and more green regulation in the European Union, and you have drill baby drill in the United States. You have tariffs now bringing some jobs back to the United States. That's highly controversial, but there will be effects to it. And you have the opposite, you have manufacturing leaving in the European Union. So we can go from policy area to policy area, and we will see that it's just the exact opposite that's happening in the United States, and that increases pressure on the European Union, because the US is going to be so much more competitive, and we're just not playing the game that we did under 4 years of Biden, where we're just basically paying for European defense, we're paying for European welfare spending, but at the same time we're being taken advantage of. And so that will put more pressure on Europe. I hope this is a good turning point to see that we have to act. We have to come back with regulation. We have to let people live their lives, innovate, and be able to grow their personal lives and businesses, and then we can be successful again. Because Europe has a long history of being the most innovative continent on basically every issue except tech policy or tech companies like Facebook and Google and others. But there is a comeback, and I hope that maybe Britain can be a good example. So far, what Britain did was they left the European Union, and then they not only copied some of the European policies, they made it much worse. With the DMCC, for example, they made the DMA much worse. But if Britain would come back and just slash regulation and adhere to the principles of the free market economy, they might be the leading star. And then if other European member states would follow that example, I think that would be wonderful. And hopefully with the new Trump administration, there's pressure on Europe to act, and we can make a turnaround.
Thank you, Andreas. No, I agree perfectly. And using one of your point, I mean, European Union is living in the middle of a digital winter, let's put it this way. This is the reason that I mentioned, I quote, the Draghi report, that is a good analysis. Not all the solutions that he provided are good, but the analysis is good. And if you think about Nokia, 30 years ago, Europe was leading in the world in time of mobile telecommunication. We lost this opportunity. And so my point is for Pieter, that you're living in Brussels and you have been working a lot on promoting smart regulation. How the Draghi report will help, at least in terms of analysis, to reshape the new European Commission policy reform? Because everyone accepted the idea that we lack 30 years, basically, innovation. We were focused on regulating everything rather than allowing innovation to flow. So how do you see the new European Commission using the Draghi report?
Well, so the Draghi report, the good thing about it was that it sort of acknowledged that EU regulation has gone too far. As you said, the solution proposed by Draghi is that the same European Commission that is responsible for all this overregulation should engage in some mass financial stimulus project. I mean, for me, that's already contradictory. Now, I guess you can already guess what part of the message that the Eurocrats liked. So one of the statistics Draghi had in his report was about GDPR, so the burdensome and arbitrary and unclear EU regulations on data, something that has only become more important with AI because you need lots of data, of course, to process. Now, he said that about 15% of the profit of smaller tech startups was being eroded as a result of the GDPR burden. Now, he presented his report in September, October 2024, and in November we had the hearings of the candidate European commissioners, and at that point Mr. McGrath, the Irish candidate commissioner, now commissioner, who's responsible for GDPR, he was asked, now, are you going to do something about it? And he said, no, I think this is largely fine. Yeah, of course, we have to explain it better to companies. That apparently was the problem. Now, to be fair, apparently, after all, he is engaging in some kind of a simplification exercise. We'll have to see what comes out of that. Yeah, I think this is a good example. GDPR used to be the flagship of the European Commission. They were so proud on this regulation. Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, was praising the European Commission for coming up with such an intelligent piece of regulation. And now, yeah, everybody who is affected by it is, of course, not so happy. It's a real drag also on the future. Sometimes the thing is with the regulations, they become, irrelevant over time. But that's not the case with GDPR because of the importance of data with AI development. I was told by an entrepreneur from Bavaria, Pakistani-German entrepreneur who's in the AI business over there, that there are healthcare startups that are dealing with AI that are abandoning Germany and Bavaria because of the extreme constraints of this particular regulation. And this is only one of the many regulations from the European Union. So to answer your question, Lorenzo, yeah, they're not really listening to even the relatively modest message that Mr. Draghi was trying to bring to them.
Thank you. I really was struck what Anne said before, and in terms of new generation, how should we make classic liberal idea more attractive? During the election cycle, after the election cycle, Student for Liberty is doing an amazing job, so congratulations for that. But it's something that it doesn't start and end with a conference. So how do we make a classic liberal idea, a free market idea, the idea of freedom detached from any statism approach, more attractive to the new generation?
It's a very good question. I think there is definitely an economic and sort of regulatory pillar to that, in the sense that, well, there just have to be actual policies that will make it a lot more attractive for young people to want to address problems and want to address problems through innovation in ways that doesn't mean that they will be confronted with massive barriers. But the way to address young people right now is identity politics in a way. Because identity politics is the thing that polarizes young people. It's the thing that sort of keeps us invested. And I think communicating or focusing the message on, we understand that there is a massive concern for identity politics, but the way you actually solve these problems that you are so passionate about isn't through some policies that don't actually mean anything or are quite petty, but because we have to focus on things like the economy. We have to focus on things like freedom of trade, freedom of movement for people. And that is how you actually get young people to be invested. Yes, we hear your problems, we see your problems, but what you're focusing on right now is not going to actually change anything. But I think also having a lot more visibility is a big issue for our liberal ideas, because I think for young people there definitely is such a monopoly on politics from the political left. They can mobilize in ways that sometimes we don't manage to. And finding those ways to do that is incredibly important. Otherwise, we're just leaving that space and leaving that vacuum to ideas that are hollow.
Fantastic. Thank you. And a lot of work to do, but I got your point. Is absolutely timely. Andreas, going back what Anne and Peter said, during this current trade war, and now we are in this 90 days period of pause between this trade war between European Union and United States, what the European Union should do to prepare the field for the trade agreement between United States and Europe. For example, the Digital Service Act, the taxation of big tech, is one of the main crucial point between friction between United States and European Union. What the European Union should do to allow, to make the trade agreement easier?
Yeah, just real quick, because I feel like we're running out of time, and we would love to also take some questions from the audience. I think maybe there is no trade war. Maybe, obviously there was a lot of opposition to the tariff announcement from President Trump, especially because some of the decisions that the administration made were difficult to understand, how they came up with the numbers and the math behind it. I guess I still haven't met one person who could explain it to me in a coherent way. But my main point is it doesn't really matter, because if at the end of the day we come to a point where we have free trade because we come to an agreement where the European Union is getting rid of some of the non-tariff measures like the DMA and the DSA and DSTs in the member states, and then we have free trade that we never had before, that would send a very, very strong message. And it would send a message to China, and it would send a message to Russia. And I feel like that is what we would really need right now. So if we all lost a decent amount in our 401ks for 3 or 4 days, but after that we brought free trade to the West again, I think that would be a very, very great achievement. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter who we should thank for. We should just be thankful that this would happen. So I hope that on both sides of the Atlantic, people negotiate and they come to a good conclusion. I hope that the European Union is not putting any obstacles into these trade negotiations, like climate policies or laws where the United States have to trace back every little piece of an item where it was produced, and if it was fair trade and fair labor laws and all these things. So if we don't do that, we just focus on the main piece, I think we can succeed. One point I would like to make to Anne why this is all related and important. If we look at the most recent election in Germany, you see the young people, 18 to 24-year-olds, they basically only vote in two extreme directions. They vote either far left or they vote far right. If we cannot bring common sense policies back to the tables that bring real solutions to people, give freedom and decisions back to their lives, and show that you can grow and you can achieve something in your lifetime, and you can make decent money, you can provide for your family, and you're not just reliant on the big state, and there's competition for you, and you can achieve something, I think then we can get these people back. But we're at a turning point. Because if you, in some of the European member states, if you have 2 or 3 kids, and you get €4,500 government subsidies just to make a living, and if you go full-time work, you make like 5.5, then there is not a big difference anymore for you to get up every morning at 7 a.m. and do your job. So we need to make it work for all of them. It has to be fair again. It has to be competitive again. And so that's all interconnected, and then we can also achieve different election results. But if we continue on this path, we have more extremes, we have less economic opportunity for all of us, and I just don't see a great future.
Okay, thank you so much. We have still 6 minutes for Q&A, so if there is any, please go ahead.
My question is about entrepreneurship and taxes. So as entrepreneurship is a base for the innovation, it's important that young men can easily start a business and develop it without a lot of burden. So this has two perspectives, bureaucratic one and amount of taxes. So while I was living in Georgia 10 years ago, I paid 1% of taxes. When I was living in Ukraine 5 years ago, I paid like 5% of taxes. And most important, I did all the accounting by myself because it was easy. I was just filling the table and send it to the revenue service. It was very easy. But now in Europe, we have, first of all, a lot of bureaucracy about it. So to do my business, I need to hire a specialist on taxes in pretty every country of Europe. And second one, the amount of taxes in Europe are very lot. From 50 or 60 in Germany to maybe 20 in Poland, 30 in Italy, and 10 in Bulgaria with some limitations. And a large part of it is social security tax. So from my perspective, this should be done on the community level, not on the state level, so people may choose if they want it. For example, if I live for 5 years...
Can you ask the question?
Yeah, a question, please. So your opinion on tax systems, please.
Please.
He raises a very good point. Britain is going through an experiment of increasing taxes really aggressively right now, and it's turning out as badly as you would expect. Newspaper report in the Times this morning says capital gains tax receipts in the UK have fallen by 10%. And that's only going to continue because we're about to see capital flight from the UK because of high taxes. And the Conservative Party, regrettably, is almost as guilty as this as the Labour Party. So we had a thing called Entrepreneurs Relief, which, as you can imagine what that is, we got rid of that under the Conservative Party. Corporation taxes increased from 19 to 25%. Yeah, there are some okay capital allowances, but overall, across the board, we're increasing taxation, and yet the public finances are only getting worse. So I think in the autumn, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, will probably have to break even more promises and keep increasing taxation to hold the public finances together. But it's not going to work because they're increasing them far too far in the wrong places, and they're increased in a way which is completely opposed to economic activity, so tax receipts are going to fall. It's a shame that we have to learn the lessons of the 1970s and 1980s all over again, but we're going to have to do it. I think this issue is the same in Europe as well.
Please.
Good afternoon. My name is Moimir Hampla. I've got one question for all of you. Aren't we accepting too easily the phraseology of the mainstream? Why do we speak about the AfD in Germany as a far right? And, and about Trump as a far right. What's a right-wing side of the policy of many populists in Europe? Basically, it's national socialism against the progressive socialism. So I think we should be very careful about the terminology.
I'm very sorry. I really hope that you didn't perceive me labeling anyone as far right or anything. What I tried to say, and I'm sorry if I misspoke, there are two clear ways in which young voters vote, and on the spectrum, they're on the left and on the right. That's, I guess, how I should have described it, and not far right or far left. Maybe we can agree far left and right. But I think your point is well taken. We should include everyone in this process instead of labeling certain groups, ignoring them, or ousting them in parliament. I think that is the key also to bring back people. For example, in Germany, I think that's what you mentioned, the AfD, you cannot ignore more than 25%. I mean, first of all, you cannot ignore any voter group, but certainly not a quarter of the voters in Germany and in the parliament. Well, because otherwise, if you remember the speech that the vice president gave at the Munich Security Conference, don't be afraid of your own people, and basically don't destroy the very thing that you're trying to save, which is democracy, by being undemocratic.
Jesus Olivares, I have a question for Peter. Peter, how serious do you think the European Commission is this time with the simplification / deregulation agenda? I come from a company that has spent over 60 million complying with EU law over the past 20 years. I know that in the past the Commission has made similar commitments. Now it seems that the ideas are more concrete, more scrutiny on amendments, more scrutiny on delegated and implementing acts. But I think, given the precedents, given the lack of follow-up based on communications, do you think this time the Commission really means it? Thank you.
I don't think they're very serious. I mean, a main reason for the lack of Europe's competitiveness at the moment is the energy price. Energy is crucial for every sector. Also in, again, AI, it's going to be super important. That's why these big tech companies are apparently constructing their own mini nuclear plants. At least that's proposed, I think. Now, I guess they'll do something good, but just like last time around, Mr. Timmermans, Frans Timmermans, he was responsible for better regulation. The next term, he became responsible for climate, and then he came up with this monstrous series of Green Deal regulations. And look, for example, if you look at the natural gas price in Europe, it's 5 times the level of the United States. But the EU's ETS climate tax is higher than the total American gas price. And you would think, oh, they're doing something about competitiveness, right? That's what they're claiming to. That's what they would look at. No. They have decided to expand the ETS, the emission trading system, which is effectively a climate tax, ETS2. ETS2 is an extra tax on families. That's going to amount to around 600 euro a year, it's been estimated. And specifically for people that drive with diesel cars, it's quite common, and people that heat their homes with gas. So even after the 2024 European Parliament election, where the Greens were hammered across Europe, even after the fact that they are now coming with some, plan to improve competitiveness, I mean, you would think the very obvious first thing to do is not to continue with, taxing energy-intensive industry, energy-intensive activity, but not even that is happening, sadly.
Last question, and after we close.
So I have a question. I really enjoyed the part about the EU regulations, mostly because I'm working in European Parliament, so I witnessed some of this stuff and I'm still witnessing it. Of course, we had this Draghi report discussion last year. He proposed emitting 500 billion euro of debt, but Germans blocked it. But we had, for example, in 2000, the Lisbon agenda that said that we will become, as the European Union, we will become the fastest developing and the most innovative part of the world. And back then we had almost similar GDP as United States. Right now the GDP is 30% higher. What I'm going to ask is that we had some struggles, we had some attempts to deregulate. We had also the Omnibus Act that just extended the deadlines for some reports. But there is no strong motivation to do it, unfortunately. And what do you think would be the motivation that would make the EU commissioners and the Commission to really deregulate instead of just talking or doing just small adjustments? Thank you.
Just real quick, I think maybe Fred and Peter also want to answer this. So yeah, you can have the best plan, like the Soviet Union had great plans, what they would achieve in the next 5 and 10 years, and then they really achieved it. And I feel like the same is true with the European Union. Yeah, oftentimes you have great statements, you have bold plans, what Europe will become and do, and then nothing happens. And I think the only way for change to happen is if there's accountability. And currently, because of the lack of the democratic factors there, we don't have accountability. So unless MEPs are losing their seats, unless the Commission, I guess, has no more revenue to pay their salaries and their staff, I really don't foresee a change, because it's such an isolated ivory tower that is ruling with an iron fist like the Soviet Party did over its people. And it's undemocratic. I personally feel like some of the policies are making a lot of lives more difficult and not easier. And again, that brings me back to my starting point. Just don't do anything. Like just sit in your nice office, drive around in your fancy cars, but like let the people live and leave us all alone. And then you have growth and innovation again. Maybe Peter.
Regrettably, it needs a bit of a crisis, and more of a crisis than Europe has right now. The post-war consensus in Britain took about 35 years to unwind after the end of the World War II, before Margaret Thatcher took place, and that was after the most brutal, humiliating 1970s decade for the United Kingdom. IMF bailouts, bodies not being buried, rubbish not being collected, and you need to see a complete collapse in public finances, tax receipts as well, and also really high-profile capital flight, so businesses properly leaving. That's starting in Germany. BASF, the chemicals industry, is just moving to America and to China, so maybe more of that, but it has to be public, and as Andreas says, it has to be democratic accountability, has to be the heart of it.
Yeah, I would say there's a few things that cannot be solved by higher interest rates. So if you have higher interest rates, a lot of these governments will get into trouble, and I think that will be one dynamic to force them back to core business and competitiveness concerns. Maybe I'm too optimistic. It also carries some risks, obviously. Now, specifically, if you would like to reform the EU, I'm not saying that's going to happen. It's very difficult. Then I think a very important measure to take is to restore all veto powers for every policy area. Because at the moment it's way too easy, to agree EU regulation. So, for example, when somebody comes with the idea in the Commission, oh, let's ban non-electric vehicles de facto from 2035 on. Well, if you would have then, let's say, only Luxembourg or Portugal saying, well, that's not a good idea, then, you know, this may be ditched. If member states know, well, it's going to happen, let's just try to, you know, minimize the damage it'll do, then you come up with the system we have today. Now, I don't have to explain to you that changing the treaty is very difficult, but you never know. In some kind of a crisis, when they have to restart the EU, I would hope that they say, well, let's keep the Ryanair EU, the right for businesses to offer their services across border. That actually was a good thing. Everybody liked it. And if we start over, let's not repeat this crazy technocratic experiment that we had.
So thank you so much to our speaker. I think that the bottom line, if the European Union keep going this socialist approach reform, is be a failing project. So we need to rethink the way we should invest again in innovation to create a tax competition among the member states and not tax harmonization. This is the only way we can save the European Union, save the project. So it's not anymore, the question is how we grow, but how we grow smarter. This is, I think, the way we can conclude this panel. So thank you so much, Liberty Com, and everybody, our speakers.